So hello and welcome back yet again to, we are going to finish this book even though I was wrong and this is not the last chapter, but that's okay. I think I've taken enough notes and annotated the stuff that I want to quote directly, so I think we can probably get through both of these today, because I feel like they kind of go together anyway, and yeah, I'm kind of ready to finish this book and then see if I can manage to do recaps for the next two books, and then we will see what happens after that. But, you know, we had a lot happen in the last chapter, and the biggest thing that happened is that Tercel has agreed, very reluctantly, but he has agreed to assume Ankeldar's bond from Germain. I guess putting it that way makes it sound like a burden. It won't be a burden for Tercel. It will, it seems, be a very heavy burden for Ankeldar. I mean, not only is he going to attempt to become bonded to another person after being bonded for over 1,000 years to Germain, but it's a big sacrifice. And that is something that would not be suggested lightly. And it seems like the only reason that Tercel's even willing to think about it is A, because he's pretty sure that whatever is going on with evil coming back into the world and him getting sent visions and the elves saying that he is the chosen one who can stop it, the only way he can stop it is by having enough power to stop it, which is going to necessitate a dragon. I don't know why they didn't suggest to him that he could do what Killarnyn did in the Outstretched Shadow, the Enduring, the Obsidian trilogy. Ooh, good job, Christine. You can remember your books really well. I don't know why they didn't suggest that he did what Killarnyn did and maybe bond with wild elementals, except for the fact that maybe they think that it wouldn't necessarily work. Maybe they think he's not as strong as Killarnyn, because it did almost use up Killarnyn, but I don't know why they didn't suggest that, but the elves and everybody else involved seem to think that the only thing that they can do is attempt to transfer the bond from Germain, who is dying, to Tercel. To do this, it will actually not only take Germain's life, but it will take the life of Sandalon, who, if you remember in the Obsidian trilogy, was just he was the little kid that Kellen met. Now he's all grown up and almost as old as Germain, and evidently he's bonded to a dragon named Petrovich, who is also willing to sacrifice themselves for this great spell. It seems like a lot of sacrifice, but that is where we are going to pick up with the second to last chapter of the Phoenix Unchained by Mercedes Lackey and James Mallory, with chapter 15, A Necessary Sacrifice. Now, chapter 15 actually picks up the day after Tercel agrees to bond with Ankeldar. And the day starts off with Rilfindel and Eularian, the twin great, I'm going to add a bunch of greats, grandchildren of Germain, knocking on Harrier and Tercel's door bright and early at the crack of dawn. And they're telling the boys that there's something coming that they're not going to want to miss, and to wake up and hurry up. And Eularian, the female of the twins, is like, Don't worry, Harrier. We've got breakfast in the horse's saddlebags. I do love the fact that Harrier thinks with his stomach, and I can't really blame him. After going for a month on nothing but soup and potatoes and protein shakes, I've noticed that I think a lot more about food lately, so I'm relating to Harrier a lot for that. But Tercell's like, what? Why are we doing this? Where are we going? Where are you taking us? And Eularian says, well, all of the dragons and the king of the elves are arriving this morning, and we don't know exactly when they're going to show up, but you're not going to want to miss it. And besides, we've got a ton to do before everything goes down tonight. And that is where Tercell is like, tonight? Said Tercell. He hoped that that didn't sound too much like a question. Harrier fills him in and says, it would be good to know of your courtesy what it is that is supposed to happen tonight. Harrier muttered that to him. Rilfendel glanced at Tercell and then looked away. The great spell will be cast tonight at moonrise. Great Father's health is too uncertain for us to wait. Oh. Tercell had a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach. He had thought that he was going to have a little more time to get used to the idea of becoming Ankeldar's new bondmate, but apparently not. So the boys and the elven twins head out to the sunning meadows, and Tercell, I mean, he's thinking very hard. And a lot of things that he's thinking about are things anybody would think about if you have someone who you know when they're going to die. And Tercell thinks, you know, it must be strange knowing exactly when you're going to die, because pretty much now Germain knows exactly when he's going to die, at moonrise. And, you know, he had gone back to try to talk to Germain and Idalia and everyone, but Germain he hadn't seen since being told that he was going to be Ankeldar's new bondmate. Idalia was quite evasive when Tercell was pressing for more information, and the only thing that Tercell really knows is that when the king of the elves, Sandalon, casts the great spell, that Sandalon and his dragon are going to die. Probably Germain is going to die. And it just seemed absolutely insane to him. So Tercell says, and quoting again, I need to ask you some questions, said Tercell. Eularian was brewing the water for tea on a small brazier. Tercell had gotten used to elven tea in the last few Sen nights, but he couldn't really say he liked it. The time for questions has passed, said Rilfendel. No, said Tercell. What if I want to stop this? Now, I can't do this. I can't let all of them die just for me. Rilfendel bowed his head for just a moment before speaking. Tercell, Great Father is dying, no matter what choice you make. Idalia is a great healer. It was so in her last life, and it is so in this one. It is her word that he will die before the snows come, and Ankeldar with him. But I think you are speaking of Sandalon Elven King and Petrovich, who also will die. Yes, said Tercell. Sandalon is our king. I think the stories in human lands do not speak of him, but know this. As a child, he saw the elven lands ravaged by the Undarkened, and his father Androniel, who was king before him, brought low by the Shadow's kiss. Along with the other children of the elven lands, he flew to the fortress of the Crowned Horns upon Ankeldar's back to seek what safety there might be. Though he had seen only a few summers, he was an elven prince, and he knew full well that he might die there should the armies of light not defeat the darkness. He has lived all of his years knowing that the peace he reigns over is a gift bought with blood and tears. To attempt to preserve it beyond his time would be to dishonor those who gave it to him. Since the ancient days, when the houses of the Elvenborn sang songs of praise to the starry hunt, we have stood against the shadow when it rose up against the light, and it is for Sandalon to do all that he can, as Andronial King did before him, to save us all from darkness's return. That is his choice, and his gift to you. So in that we see the way the elves are looking at this. They are looking at it, I was going to say pragmatically, and I still think that might fit the best, but they're looking at it as they've already lost so much. I mean, every time that they win against the darkness, it comes at a huge price. And I think in their minds, maybe this time they're getting ahead of it. We don't know if they are or not getting out ahead of it, but maybe they are. And so Sandalon is willing to give his life to try to preserve peace by empowering Tercel. Tercel, of course, argues. He's like, I can't do anything. And the elves let him know that he doesn't know if he can do anything or not. All the wild magic asks is that you try. Tercel doesn't really feel like eating or drinking. The elves try to coax him into eating. Harrier just bullies him into eating, and he does end up eating. And as they are packing away their breakfast things, the dragons arrive. And it's probably less than 20, but more than 12 dragons, and it's the most beautiful thing that either of the boys have ever seen. There's red, blue, green, gold. Even Ankeldar, the black, is flying in there. They're just soaring around and then finally circling and landing. Tercel and Harrier don't actually join the greeting ceremony for the dragons, but Rilfendel and Eularian thought maybe they would at least want to see it. They go and bring Harrier and Tercel back to the main house and let them know that they probably want to bathe and get ready. And when it comes to getting ready, well, Harrier almost has a hissy fit, and the only thing that stops Harrier from having an utter hissy fit is seeing the outfit that has been selected for Tercel. Because Harrier's outfit was in shades of green and violet, he had almost refused to wear the clothes at all until Tercel had pointed out that the elves had picked out blue and pale orange for him. And if Harrier called the color peach, well, they weren't going to have to worry about going to the banquet at all because neither of them would be attending. They both kind of wonder, why did the elves always want to dress up like flowers? The outfits were identical to each other and quite elaborate, so it took them both a very long time to bathe and dress. After that is done, Harrier is a bit stunned by how nice Tercel looks. You wouldn't think that the combinations of colors that were picked out would actually work, but they do. Tercel, of course, is like, I don't want to go. And quoting again, "Tough," said Harrier unsympathetically. "If you didn't want to go, you shouldn't have said yes to this stupid idea in the first place, and then I wouldn't have to be dressed like a girl." "Don't you even care that they're going to die?" said Harrier, or said Tercel, looking at Harrier. For all of his words, Harrier looked nothing like a girl. A flower. A really dangerous flower, maybe, but nothing like a girl. Harrier tells Tercel that everybody keeps saying that they're going to be dying soon anyway. I guess that's supposed to make us both feel better, but I don't like it. And Harrier's like, but Tercel, you're kind of forgetting something. And Harrier's like, or Tercel, good job, me. Tercel's like, what am I forgetting? And Harrier says, Samara. Samara died so that you could even get here. You know, she died. I think this is stupid, but I can't think of anything else we could do. And you need to just do this. Like, somebody's already died just to get you here. And yeah, it kind of sucks that 3 more beings are going to die just to empower you, but I don't think that the elves would be asking us to do this if it weren't important. And so they head to the evening dinner. A few things mark this dinner out as being a little bit different. Everybody's clothes are a little bit nicer. There are 2 tables instead of the normal one. Tercel and Harrier are introduced to Sandalon and his daughter Vardinel, as well as to a bunch of people that make up the King's Council, but neither boy remembers any of the names. They do remember Vardinel and Sandalon, but that's about it. Tercel is very dismayed because he and Harrier were seated at the same table as the king. And then Tercel is quite perplexed because Sandalon is talking with Idalia and they're kind of teasing each other. And Sandalon keeps saying that Idalia is his sister, but Idalia said that she was Kellen's sister. He is very confused, but he is determined not to ask any questions. And, you know, he can't quite figure out how she can be both, but whatever. And then Sandalon turns to Tercel, and Sandalon says, "But I am lacking in courtesy to a guest beneath your roof," said Sandalon, turning his attention to Tercel. "And you have come from a farther place than any I have ever seen. It would please me greatly to hear of Arameth, for many friends of my childhood called it home. I fear, though, that it will have changed much from the days when Kellen and Killarnan knew it." Now, Harrier goes into a choking laughing fit over that, and Tercel is frantically trying to figure out what sort of things have changed in Arameth that might be interesting to the king of the elves. For a moment, he couldn't even think of what to say, because the only thing going through his mind is, don't you know you're going to die tonight? But then he corrects himself, and of course Sandalon knows that. Sandalon had been alive during the last war. He saw Endarkened in the flesh, and, you know, if Tercel was willing to leave home and try to keep the firewoman from gaining power, and Tercel had been born in a time of peace, then how much more likely was it that Sandalon was willing to die just to destroy the firewoman? And Tercel thinks to himself, first Samara, now Sandalon. How many more people are going to die hoping I can do something that I don't know how to do? So he takes a deep breath and begins telling Sandalon about all of the changes. After the meal is over, everybody gathers outside, and again, this is a very big difference between humans and elves in this world. In Arameth, important ceremonies are all held, you know, in important places. Here, they just gather in the garden. They walk down a little bit, not all the way to the sunning terraces, which is what Tercel had expected, but a good distance past the little library that he was given to study high magic. And he gets out there, and Ankildar is there, curled up around Germain. And Tercel's like, strangely calm. He thought that this would be when he was going to be the most upset, but none of the elves seem upset. Not Idalia, not Germain, not Sandalon, who's joking and talking with people as they walk out. The ancient elven king might have been going to a dance instead of going to his death. Tercel thinks that he had sought out the elves because he trusted their judgment, so he was gonna have to trust it a little bit further. Germain is placed right next to Ankildar's head. He reaches up, touches the dragon's nose. Ankildar does not look happy. Idalia comes out. She bent over Germain for a moment, her long hair hiding his face. When she straightens, she strokes Ankildar's brow ridge and then steps away. And that is when another dragon, a very large blue dragon, comes forward and speaks to Tercel. And this is going to be a very long passage I am quoting from, because I feel like it's pretty much all of the context. It's the last 2 pages of this chapter, and we are quoting from it directly. I am Petrovich, the blue dragon said to Tercel. I thank you for making it possible for my bondmate and I to serve the land beyond our death. Tercel swallowed hard. Though Rilfindel had insisted that it was true, and he had been trying to make himself believe it for days, somehow hearing the words from Petrovich convinced him far more than even Sandalon's calm demeanor had. This was the right thing to do. The price was terribly high for all of them, even for him and Ankildar, if they survived, but it was right. I just hope I can, he said shakily. Have faith in the goodness of leaf and star, Petrovich said. Now Sandalon entered the circle, leaning heavily on his long carved walking staff. Verdinel walked beside him. Sandalon reached Tercel's side and stopped. He set his walking staff carefully down on the grass and lifted both hands to his head, carefully removing the coronet of green stones and white pearls that he wore and placing it on Verdinel's head. Next he removed a large ring from his finger that was set with a stone of the same pale luminous green and placed it upon her hand. He kissed her gently upon both cheeks, his hands on her shoulders. Rule wisely and well, child of my house. My father left me a land at peace, but I fear I do not make you the same gift. All goes as the wild magic wills, great father. So it was in great Queen Visilaire Farcanon's time, and so it shall be in mine, Verdinel answered. Then Petrovich and I are content, Sandalon said, and Verdinel stepped back to take her place amongst the circle of watchers. Tercel had thought that Sandalon would speak to him next, that Germain would say something, that there would be a chance to brace himself, but the next thing that happened was that Sandalon raised his hands, and suddenly Tercel could not look at anything but Ankildar. He tried to look away to find Harrier in the crowd, and he couldn't. It's happening, he thought in panic. He thought there would be bright lights, colors. There always were when he did a spell, but there weren't. He could still feel the wind ruffling through his hair, smell the night-blooming flowers, hear the crickets chirping. He just couldn't see anything but Ankildar. Ankildar was looking at him, too. And Tercel realized that it didn't matter if he had agreed and Ankildar had agreed. It didn't matter that this was important. He didn't want to be here, and neither did Ankildar. If this was even remotely the right sort of thing to be doing, people would have been doing it for centuries. This was wrong. This was a mistake. Even more, he realized he should have stayed home. But the darkness was coming back. It was coming back, but slowly. The parts that were showing up now were things that people could deal with. And when that got bad enough, and maybe they already were, then everyone would see that there was a real problem and they would figure out how to deal with it. There were books in Stereoporin and Arameth. There were wild mages. Other high mages were probably being born right this moment. It wasn't a rare gift, really. It was just nobody ever did anything with it, and he could go home and tell people that they needed to start training up high mages again. In fact, he could take all of the books that Germain had gathered and go back to Arameth and find those high mages and train them himself. That would be... it would work out so much better. I know. Suddenly, Tercel felt as if he were thinking someone else's thoughts, and he realized that Ankildar knew exactly how he felt and understood. Nobody could understand it better. It would be so comfortable to run and hide and let somebody else deal with all of the nasty heroics. It would certainly be better than shouldering the guilt of seeing people die and knowing that you might have been, and probably were, responsible, that you could have stopped it or at least not seen it. But if we don't do something, who will? Tercel wasn't sure. Which of the two of them thought that? All he could see was Ankildar's eyes, golden and glowing. You can still refuse, even now. But Ankildar sounded as if he would be unhappy if Tercel did, and Tercel knew, without knowing how, that he would be very lonely. He reached out for Ankildar in the same way that he reached out to the power behind his spells, and suddenly Tercel felt the great spell complete itself as the new bond was forced into place. Something they had both consented to. Something that had never been meant to be, but something neither of them could ever regret. There was a huff of air, as if the world turned itself inside out. Tercel could look away from Ankildar now, and as he did, he saw that Sandalon and Petrovich simply weren't there anymore. And Germain. My beloved is dead. Ankildar's voice was soft with grief. Will you love me now, Tercel? Forever, Tercel said. He knew that it was true, just as he knew that he now had the power to work any of the spells in any of the books that he had read. He didn't have to think about it. The knowledge was just there, something that he had gained as simply as if he had picked up a book from a table. The bond between dragon and mage. But with that came more. All of Ankildar's grief and loss abruptly poured through Tercel, as if they were his own, and he flung himself on Ankildar's neck, sobbing, as the great black dragon wailed in grief. And that is where that chapter ends, but there is one more chapter. But, you know, let's first talk a little bit, because that is one heck of a sacrifice. I mean, we met Sandalon as like a 5-year-old elven child who was forced to grow up way too fast, because war forces everybody to grow up way too fast. And now we got to be here at the end of his life, when he passes on his crown and his signet ring to his daughter and works a great spell. And then, yeah, Germain. rest in peace, Germain. We are all going to miss him. I mean, I'm glad that we get to keep Enkildar. But, oh, at what a price. Anyway, I'm going to grab a drink, and I will be right back because we have one chapter left. All right. We are back with the final chapter, chapter 16 of The Phoenix Unchained by Mercedes Lackey and James Mallory, doing a recap and my thoughts. So we start this chapter after Harrier and Tercel have started to move out. They've got their wagon, they're being escorted by Eularian and Rilfendel, and, you know, Harrier's jealous. He didn't think that he would be jealous, you know, and he didn't really think about it very much at all. But his main function seems to be wagon driver, and he's a little bit upset about that. Because Tercel apparently needs all of the stuff in this big wagon. It's all of his high mage nonsense. And yeah, Tercel has now everything that he needs, including apparently a best new friend. Quoting from the book again. Harrier hadn't realized, when he had agreed that Tercel should go ahead with this bond thing, exactly what it was going to mean. He knew what Ithrosa had said about bonding, but frankly he hadn't paid a lot of attention because Ithrosa had said a lot of things that Harrier had suspected at the time were just meant to tease and annoy him. But all of that stuff about the bond being the most important thing between a dragon and a bonded, apparently it was true. Harrier's like, sure. Enkildar misses Germain a lot, and that is resulting in Tercel being pretty dang miserable, as well as being all wrapped up with talking to Enkildar every moment that he's awake. They had stayed back for Germain's funeral, and Tercel had even spoken at it as if he were a member of the family, which Harrier would have found creepy if he hadn't been so mad. Back then, he had just been starting to figure out what this whole bond thing really meant. And if he had thought about it, he kind of thought that maybe having Enkildar along would be like a really big dog coming with them. You know, one that could talk and fly and things like that. He didn't expect Enkildar to become Harrier or Tercel's new bestie. And he's jealous. He's hurt. But he's like, fine. Just get used to it. You know, he's feeling a little bit useless because either Tercel is out practicing magic spells with Enkildar, who, even though he doesn't know how to work high magic, has still been around a very long time and knows innately a lot of things about magic, or Tercel is off flying on Enkildar's back. This is another sore point for Harrier. Quoting again. Tercel had been afraid of heights, but apparently being on the back of a dragon was completely different. Oh, of course, Tercel had offered to take Harrier with him. Enkildar's saddle was built for two, but then there wouldn't be anybody to drive the wagon, would there? It was all that he was good for now, Harrier supposed, driving wagons. He wouldn't have made a good portmaster either. It wasn't even that he disliked Enkildar. How could you dislike a legend? And he felt sorry for him, he really did. A year was a long time, and Enkildar had just lost someone who had been his friend for 1,008 years, maybe even more. And not only that, he had lost his bondmate, which Harrier was getting the vague idea was something a lot closer than just friends. But it still doesn't make Harrier feel any better, and it still makes him think that that doesn't give Enkildar the right to take Harrier's friend away from him. He does console himself with the thought that, you know, At least he's driving the wagon. And, you know, there were probably a lot of people back in Kellen Nightmage's army who didn't do anything but drive wagons, and nobody remembers their name now. But you know what? Nobody in the entire army probably would have gotten a hot dinner or a nice dry place to sleep if there hadn't been wagon drivers. It makes them feel a little better, but not a lot. So with those thoughts, they make camp for the night. And of course, you know, Tercel went off and practiced magic some more. And Yularian and Rilfendel are going to be leaving the next day. And Harrier can't sleep. And sneakily, and you wouldn't think that something the size of Ankildar could be sneaky, Ankildar comes up and is like, do you want to talk about what's wrong? Harrier's like, talk about what? What? There's nothing wrong. Everything is perfectly fine. And Ankildar's not stupid. He's like, look, whatever's keeping you up this late at night, you and I are going to have to talk this out sometime. He says that he knows that things haven't gone the way Harrier wanted, but, you know, Harrier shoots back with, what? You mean monsters coming back? Meeting the elves? Or, oh, do you mean my friend getting a dragon for his naming day present? Harrier tried to make a joke out of it, but he was dismayed at how bitter he sounded. And Ankildar's like, it wasn't exactly my choice, but I can't regret the chance that I've now bonded and getting to know Tercel. And they talk a little bit more, and they end up talking through the night, and they start to come to an understanding, and they're just, you know, just chatting. Ankildar says to Harrier that Tercel still needs friends, and Harrier's like, he's got you. What does he need friends for? And Ankildar says, we will have each other until the end of our lives, but this does not mean, nor should it, that Tercel should renounce all other ties of kin and friendship. I am quite wonderful, but even I have limitations. Harrier laughed despite himself. You're Ankildar Starcrown. There isn't anything that you can't do. Ankildar snorted. Were he hurt, I could not tend him. I can cast no spells for his protection. I am magic. I am not a mage. When we come to places where I must hide, and we shall, of that I am certain, you must aid him and keep him from rash acts. I do not yet know him as well as I will, but I fear already that there are times that Tercel is excessively trusting, and that frightens me. Harrier kind of laughs a little and is like, huh, you think you're scared now about stuff like that? You should hear some of the stuff that he did on the way here. You'd turn white. And kind of with that, they chat all night, with Harrier telling Ankildar more and more stories and becoming friends. Later on, Harrier says, you knew them all, the heroes. What were they like? And Ankildar says, they were very much like people. Ankildar said, sounding as if Harrier's question entertained him greatly. Except for Shulkin, of course. Shulkin was a unicorn, and, well, I suppose you don't know what unicorns are like. They tend to be extremely annoying, and they're rarely serious, but the rest, well, they seem to me very much like other people. This business of being a hero, it's partially having the opportunity to act and partially being remembered for what you did. Certainly when you rescued Tercel from the end of a dock when you were both small at the risk of your own life, that was heroic. You're crazy. said Harrier. I just did what anybody would have done. And so said Kellen and Killarnin and Pateriel and Vistakia and hundreds of others whose names you don't know and who only their families remember. The next morning, Harrier, for once, is the last one up, because he and Ankildar talked well into the night. Finally, he wakes up, and Tercel is threatening to throw the rest of their food away, and Ankildar says, I would reconsider such a rash, hasty action were I you, Tercel. The portmaster's son has a fearsome temper and is quick to anger when he is hungry. Tercel looked from Ankildar to Harrier in surprise. Is something going on I should know about? No, said Harrier and Ankildar in unison. So they become friends, which, you know, is a good thing, because jealousy is one of those things that can fester and cause issues. I've been in friendships where my best friend suddenly gets a new friend, and it took me a long time to learn that you can, even if you don't like their new friend, you can still remain friends. People are allowed to have more than one friend. I had to learn that the hard way. When I was in probably 3rd through 6th grade, I had a best friend that I did everything with. But she was a year older than me, and when she went to junior high, I was still back in elementary school, and she got a new friend, and that was when I was very young and didn't think that you could have more than one friend. We fell out for a very long time just because of my jealousy. So I'm glad that Ankildar and Harrier are able to become friends. The next morning, going back to the book, Yularion and Rilfindel at last took their leave, and they seemed quite relieved to get away from the rude long ears, or short ears, round ears. Tercel laughs and he's like, you got really good at that whole elven manners thing, and that's when Harrier lets him know it's because Yularion kept hitting me. I mean, that is really good incentive to learn. But they're moving on, and on they go. And Harrier is not nearly as jealous anymore, because he's thinking about the fact that now, instead of being jealous because he's just down driving the wagon, he can be looking forward to conversations at the fire, you know, and that's pretty cool. So after Ankildar and Tercel have gone off to do their high magic practice, Harrier's putting the camp to rights, getting everything packed up, getting the horses in harness, getting all of those camp things that he has to do. And periodically he's looking around because he's kind of looking forward to getting out of the elven lands, because, you know, he might have been used to things like brownies, fawns, and centaurs. He grew up with those. But he also kind of wants to go swimming, and he's going to head down to the lake and just hope that none of the other folk are down there. You know, the ones that you can't see but periodically just talk to you out of nowhere. So he gets down to the edge of the stream, and he's pulling off his tunic. He's about to pull off his boots when a voice stopped him. Well, thank goodness. I thought those two would never leave. Elves, always poking in where they're not wanted. They can be really annoying sometimes, don't you think? Harrier yelped and dove for his shirt. He clutched it, looking around, but all he saw was forest. Just my luck. Now I run into one of the things that's invisible. What? He said at last. There's a flicker from the other side of the forest, as though the sun has suddenly grown brighter, and something steps through the trees. It was a unicorn. Her coat was the pale gold of morning sunlight, except for the white blaze down the center of her face. Her short, brushy mane was white as well, as was the lion-like tuft at the end of her tail, and she had 4 white socks. Her nose was pink, and so were her cloven hooves. It's a unicorn. I mean, both Harrier and Tercel did say that they would like to see a unicorn. He sees her horn, which is a beautiful, like, white blaze in the middle of her forehead. And then when the light hits it, it's a rainbow. It's every color, kind of looks like mother of pearl. And he's entranced by that and her amazing bright blue eyes with long dark lashes. Harrier had been startled by many of the things that he had seen in the elven lands. Dryads, selkies. He had been overawed and impressed by the majesty of the dragons, but nothing in his life had prepared him for the heart-stopping beauty of a unicorn. She was as fragile, delicate, beautiful as a flower, grace personified. She opens up her mouth and says, "I've been following you ever since you left the city, waiting for a chance to get you alone, you know." Harrier can only state the obvious and says that she's a unicorn, and she's like, "Yep, been one all my life. Are you always so oblivious? You know, I mean, I'm guessing you've been a human all your life, right?" Harrier tries to apologize to her, and she's like, "Oh, don't worry about all that right now. I've brought you a present. It's in this bag around my neck. Come here, come here. I won't bite you." Harrier realizes that, yes, the unicorn is wearing a bag around her neck, and who could possibly have dared touch such a beautiful, wonderful creature and put a collar around her neck? Without thinking, he walked towards her, only to realize when it was far too late to do anything about it that he had walked right into the middle of the deepest part of the stream, boots and all. The unicorn threw back her head and brayed with laughter. Harrier slipped and floundered in the muddy bottom of the stream, sliding completely beneath the water. He lost the hold that he had on his tunic, and when he surfaced again, he saw it floating downstream out of reach. The unicorn was on her knees, sobbing with laughter. She was shaking her head back and forth, and her tail lashed. "Oh," she wailed, "humans, I had forgotten how funny you all were." She rolled to her side, kicking out weakly, helpless in her mirth. Harrier stomped his way over to the unicorn's side of the stream. Fragile, delicate, beautiful. He wondered how you would go about strangling a unicorn. They fight. And this is the question I think that Georgia was asking about. Why do I think that she was rolling around on the ground laughing? And from my knowledge of the books going forward, and just from my own supposition, I think that she is a fairly young unicorn. Even though she said that she had forgotten how funny humans were, I feel like she is a young unicorn. And all unicorns have sort of a puckish sense of humor. You know, they definitely seem to all be tricksters. Like with Shulkin, it was more of a dry, sardonic humor. But I feel like in the Obsidian trilogy, we got to see glimpses of humor. And we do know that they do have their other things, like they all tend to have a bit of a sweet tooth. But I think that this unicorn is young and maybe a little bit naive, and if I have to be honest, a bit of a bully. Not maliciously, but a bit of a bully nonetheless. So that is my personal thoughts on this particular unicorn. Now, Harrier lets her know that she did that on purpose. And she's like, I mean, a little on purpose. If you would have looked, there was a log, you could have walked on that. And Harrier stomps the rest of the way across the stream. He's very mad because that was his favorite shirt and it just floated downstream. But he goes over and tries to fight a little bit with her, and she's like, don't you want your present? Her voice was soft and coaxing, as though she were sorry for the nasty trick that she had just played on him, but Harrier could see the sparkle of mischief in her eye, and he wasn't sure he wanted any presents for her. And he's like, nope, don't really want presents. Every time somebody gives me presents, it just makes trouble. Thinking particularly of his naming day gift from Uncle Alfred and the sword from Ronidia, and he's like, and especially if it's books. Somebody gave me a book as a present once, and it started this whole nightmare. And the unicorn's like, aw, but you'll know exactly what to do with these. Don't be shy, you'll hurt my feelings. Harrier argues with her a little bit more. I mean, you know, he lost his tunic. He's all wet. He just got laughed at by this gorgeous unicorn. And she's like, look, you're much nicer than you want anybody to know. And this is a present. And I'm tired of wearing this collar around my neck. I can't exactly unlatch it myself, you know. So, with much persuasion, Harrier takes the bag off of the unicorn's neck, and she's like, well, you should open it. Harrier says to her, I ought to just throw it in the stream. If unicorns could smirk, he would swear that she just did. Oh, you could, but it really wouldn't change anything. Look, if I say that I'm sorry for making you walk into the stream, I'm really not, and you did look funny, but if I do, will you open the pouch? Leaf and Star, I'm a unicorn, a creature of the light. You're supposed to trust me. Harrier admits that she does have a point. You know, she might have a terrible sense of humor, but she definitely couldn't be evil. So he opens up the pouch, and inside are 3 small books. And he's like, oh, God. These are books. You weren't looking for me. You probably meant to give these to Tercel. The unicorn lets him know that, no, these are definitely for him. And is like, why don't you look at the title pages? Just kind of holding his hand. I'm sure we all know exactly what 3 books they are, though. The Book of Stars, the Book of Moon, the Book of Sun. And Harrier's like, you can't be serious. Quoting, why would I want to be serious about something that just changed your whole life? Said the unicorn. And don't even suggest that these would be better off in Tercel's hands. No, Tercel has other things to do with his life. You, on the other hand, get to protect him. And guess what that makes you? Stupid, said Harrier. A night mage, said the unicorn. The very first one since Kalantavadan. See, you didn't even have to guess. I'm just going to tell you, and now you can stop being all grumpy and we can be friends. So you don't have to worry too much about casting spells because you're never going to be good at it, but you probably should have paid more attention when those silly elves wanted to give you sword lessons. Oh well, too late now. Just read your 3 books and hope for the best. Let's go tell Tercel and Ankildar. Oh, and my name is Kerta. I almost forgot to tell you. She goes trotting off to go find Tercel and Ankildar, all happy. Harrier is standing in the middle of the stream, holding the 3 books. His 3 books. He yells after her, hey, what if I don't want to be a night mage? And she just lets him know, too late. Harrier stared down at the books in his hand for a moment longer before stuffing them back into the bag. He slung it over his shoulder and then walked to the log that he had begun to cross slowly and carefully. As he reached the other side, a thought hit him. The wild magic never sent gifts without need. If it had just decided to turn him into the very first night mage born since the time of Kellen the poor orphan boy, then things weren't just bad. They were really bad. And that is where the book ends. With a good and proper dun 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 or something like that. So we will be moving on to the next book. We will be doing recaps of it. I haven't decided yet if it's going to be a nightly thing once we finish Lady Night. Haven't quite decided what we're going to do there yet. I did happen to pick up today another copy of, or a copy of Great Expectations. So now I have, I think I only have 4 books. 2 of the books on my book haul actually ended up still being in some form of copyright. And that is, oddly enough, who would have thought that Don Quixote, the first novel, like technically the first novel ever written back in the 1500s, would still be under copyright, but it kind of sort of is. It's one of those that's in this weird gray area where it's kind of public domain, but also kind of copyrighted, depending on what translation you get and stuff like that. And as I do not speak Spanish, and especially as I don't speak 15th century Spanish, I couldn't read it in the original translation, which I know is copyright free. But my wonderful neighbor gave me a copy of Great Expectations, which is copyright free. Then there's also A Tale of Two Cities, both by Charles Dickens. Pride and Prejudice, so far I know, is readable, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Another one that surprised me, thank you to Callie Fox, by the way, for doing a little bit more research on it, is this Stories of Little Animals. The copyright has been renewed a few times since it was first published, so this one is also a no-go for reading aloud. But you know what? It's still a very cool book that I am going to read. I can't guarantee that I'm going to read Don Quixote myself. I started trying to read it a little bit, and it would have been a hard one to read out loud anyway. But maybe I will. Anyway, but that is all for the future. Also in the future, probably in a couple of days, we will start recapping the chapters in Book 2 of the Enduring Flame saga. So, thank you for joining me for this book. Thank you for joining me for these recaps, which I know aren't as cool as a straight reading, but also kind of better than nothing. And hopefully I'm keeping them at least kind of entertaining. So, thank you so much. I will see you next time.